we are now going to discuss the chapter 6, which is about the fields in Filipino psychology, applied, and social psychology. Chapter 6 is composed of 6 topics. First is the Filipino political psychology, social cognition, peace and conflict resolution. Second, Filipino sexuality and gender and Filipino feminism. Third, Filipino psychotherapy. Fourth will be the unang dekada ng psikolohiyang Pilipino. Fifth is about Filipino social psychology and pahiwatig. Lastly, new directions, volunteering, and development psychology. Before we start to discuss our topic, we are going to introduce ourselves first. I am Leia May M. Flores. I am going to discuss about the Filipino political psychology and Filipino psychotherapy.
I am Kyla Adeline B. Butaran, and I'll be discussing the unang dekada ng Psikolohiyang Pilipino, the new direction volunteering, and also the developmental psychology.
And I am Rochelle Ide Alday. I'm going to discuss the Filipino sexuality and gender, Filipino feminism, and Filipino social psychology, and lastly, the pahiwatig.
The first topic is about the Filipino political psychology. Filipino political psychology studies the psychological processes and behaviors of Filipinos involved in power situations. When we say power situations, that the government, the politics, and politicians are included. Due to its context-sensitive nature, the field of political psychology evolves in different ways, depending on the historical and political context within which it is embedded. In other words, political psychology is dedicated to understanding politics, politicians, and political behavior in a psychological perspective. Political psychology also describes both the effect of psychological processes on the political environment and the influence of a particular political context on the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of its members. So sa political psychology, ina-assess din kung ano ba yung effect ng political situations sa psychological being ng isang individual. For example na lang is during the trauma during the martial law, ina-assess ng political psychological perspective kung ano ba yung effect kung bakit nagka-trauma yung mga Filipino citizen that time. So maybe the reason kasi maraming namatay and those innocent na mga namatay din. Next is about social cognition of human rights. Human rights may be viewed as our expectation of our basic entitlements as members of the category human. Human rights are rights we have simply because we exist as human beings. And according to Taro in 1991, those inalienable rights are called human rights because it is a human being and those which he may legally inherit or acquire by title as necessary to his life, liberty, dignity, and self-development. So kasama na dito yung right natin to live, right to liberty and freedom, right to live your life free of discrimination, and so on. Though the definition would appear to indicate an objective entity, rights are largely conceptualized and defined by the social cognition, which is derived from the word social cognition. Social cognition is a subtopic of various branches of psychology that focuses on how people process, store, and apply information about other people and social situations. It focuses on the role that cognitive processes play in social interactions. So, social cognition is responsible kung bakit tayo nagkakaroon ng na-perceive natin yung isang tao na nakikita pala na unang best natin nakita. That's why we have first impression, and it is because of social cognition and the way we apply information during social situations. It is also because of social cognition. Let's come now to peace and conflict resolution. First, the endogenous psychology of peace. It is the concept of societal friendships and harmony in the absence of hostility and violence. In a social sense, peace is commonly used to mean a lack of conflict, such as war, and freedom from a fear of violence between individuals or groups. So always remember na pag peace, ibig sabihin, ito yung um, peace without the use of violence. Kumbaga, nagkasundo kayo without violence during the conflict. Throughout history, leaders have used peacemaking and diplomacy to establish a certain type of behavioral restraint, and that has resulted in the establishment of regional peace or economic growth through various forms of agreements or peace treaties. So, yung mga leaders noon during, siguro, lagi naman ginagamit ng mga leaders na instead na magkaroon ng war, halimbawa between countries, ang ginagawa na lang is nagkakaroon ng agreement para magkaayos yung dalawang country imbes na produce pa ng war, like World War II, ganun, and so on. Next, the endogenous psychology of conflict. During situations of conflict, the self undergoes a period of inner pain characterized by disappointment, anger, and irritation for the other party. Usually kasi 'di ba, during conflict nangyayari siya between two people, and syempre you will be magkakaroon ka ng inner pain or mixed emotions kasi nadi-disappoint ka sa nangyayari, nagagalit ka towards that person, and nai-irritate ka kasi siguro um yung person na yon hindi niya naiintindihan point niya kung saan siya nagkamali. At the same time, there are feelings of sympathy and pity for the other. Kasi kung ikaw yung isang taong nakasaksi ka ng conflict between two people, syempre you will have sympathy doon sa taong naagrabyado and maaawa ka sa kanya. And while sa isa naman, magagalit ka kasi siya yung nakaagrabyado. The self then avoids interaction with the person to avert confronting conflict issue. So, ito I think typically yung mga Pilipino ginagawa to kasi ako personally na-apply ko din to sa sarili ko. Like, ako pag meron akong hindi na pagkasunduan na isang tao, ang ginagawa ko is hindi ko siya pinapansin to avert the conflict issue para na rin hindi pa mas lumala pa. And on the other hand, confrontation is resorted to when the other has acted to intentionally or successfully the reputation of the individual, or when the other's demands, which cannot be successfully fulfilled by the individual, are causing relations between the self and the other to turn bad. So, ito confrontation to in a bad way. Kasi meron din confrontation in a good way, which is iko-confront mo yung isang tao para magkaayos kayo, or iko-confront mo siya para mas masira pa yung pagsasamahan nyo. Like, for example, kakausapin mo siya para idiin mo pa na siya yung may mali. So, that is confrontation in a bad way. Masisirain ba yung reputation ng isang individual? Next is the endogenous psychology of conflict resolution. The resolution of conflict is usually undertaken to correct the wrong behaviors, assumptions, and judgments of the other person as well as those in the community whom or she is influenced. There is perception on the part of the individual that the other has not engaged in correct thinking and has not been able to judge accurately and to reason wisely. So, hindi isang solution yung hindi mo lang pag-interact dun sa isang taong nagkaroon kayo ng conflict. Kailangan ayusin nyo to in a correct way na kailangan itama nyo parehas yung naging behavior nyo, and ayusin mo yung na-misjudge or yung misinterpret niyang sinabi mo. So you also need to correct yung thinking mo din na you should accept din kung saan ka ba nagkamali. Okay. Correcting the wrong impressions and judgments of the other is a goal of resolution. Conflict is said to be resolved when contact is resumed by initiating communication or by responding to communication overtures from the other. So, dun na nga sinabi ko na rin na pag tinama mo kasi yung isang wrong impression and judgment ng isang tao tungkol sa'yo, then magbabago yung tingin nila sa'yo. So, magkakaroon kayo ng pagkakaintindihan na. And sinasabi din na by initiating communication, ma-resolve niyo rin yung conflict niyo. Kasi, syempre, pag nagsalita ka na towards that person, pag kinausap mo na siya, you will understand each other na kasi meron ng communication. And ang communication kasi typically, ito talaga yung isang way para magkaintindihan tayo and magka-connect tayo sa ibang tao.
So, Filipino sexuality and gender. Filipino gender traits would more likely be related to benevolent sexism or the belief that women should be protected and valued by men, due to established links between a society that values chivalry and this particular type of sexist ideology. So, sexuality in the Philippines encompasses sexual behavior, sexual practices, and sexual activities exhibited by men and women of the Philippines past and the present. So dito kumbaga pinapakita yung understanding of how a society defines a gender and sexuality. So in terms of traditions and beliefs natin as Filipino, yung sinasabi nating respect or yung paggalang ng mga kalalakihan sa mga kababaihan, which is kinagawian talaga ng mga Filipinos way back before and until now. So for example nga is when it comes to courtship, nandun yung way of respectfulness and showing special courtesy which regard to women chivalrous behavior. So kapag magpapaalam na yung isang guy sa parents ng nililigawan niya, nandun talaga yung seriousness and sincerity niya for his intention to the girl. So in the Philippines, gender and sexual orientation are closely intertwined. So in this case, Filipino gender constructions seem to supersede definitions of sexual orientation. So, di ba nga, people in the Philippines, so in terms about sa sexual orientation and sa gender identities natin, it have a distinctive culture in society and also have limited legal rights lang. So, and most likely kasi sa mga gays or bakla or and lesbian or tomboy, they are more tolerated than accepted talaga in Filipino society. And especially ngayon na hindi lang gays and lesbians but we have also now the LGBTQ na tinatawag, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. And we have these gender rights to fight their privilege as an individual and also to attain the gender equality among all Filipinos here in our society. So kailangan natin tandaan talaga yung gender fairness not only for women and men but also for the LGBTQ community. Kahit anong kasarian mo pa or what. So we have the freedom to choose what we want to be as a person. So we have naman Filipino feminism. So feminism is not monolithic. It is a movement with various strains pushing and pulling against each other throughout history. So all based on the personal struggles of their demographics. So pag sinabi nating monolithic, it is used to describe something societal like our religion or the traditions and beliefs organization. So, ibig sabihin hindi ito something societal or religion or traditions or beliefs. So, and basically up to today's ang mga kababaihan who continue to fight against gender oppression. So, after all the battles and obstacles na hinarap ng mga Filipino women, it is important for us to know specifically tayong mga kababaihan, how strong we are. So, before the feminist existed, there's also na tinatawag nating babaylan. So, babaylan serve as the female political and socio-economic identity that played a major role in the Philippine pre-colonial societies, otherwise known as barangay or balangay. So, they have also role in culture, religion, medicine, and other theoretical knowledge were crucial in each barangay. So, may mga right din sila to obtain property, mag-file ng divorce, and remarry. So, yung mga babae din before, they could be the chief of barangay or a priestess. So, women's involvements in male-dominated affairs can be traced back to the Spanish colonial rule. So wherein kasi during the Philippine-American War and sa mga sumunod na taon, and yung mga Spaniards, friars, demonized or parang tinakot nila yung mga babaylan for saying that they practice witchcraft or yung sinasabi nating mga black magic. So although nagkaroon ng take control yung mga friars with Filipino women, and suppress Filipino culture and practices like this babaylan, they still played major roles in their community. So in regards to revolution and liberation of the Filipino people from the colonial rule. So we have introduced now the courageous and strong women in Katipunan. So firstly, we have the activist patriotic Filipino, which refer to Gabriela Silang. So is best known for being the first female leader of a Filipino movement for independence from Spain. So dito nabigyan pansin ng ang local feminist organization dahil sa kanyang leadership and courageous act or behavior that brought a lasting example to women of the Philippines. And we have also the women of Malolos struggled disapprove that women were destined to stay at home and take care of the children. So, and ipinakita din nila na women are equal with men daw kasi pagdating sa rights for education. And lastly, we have Melchora Aquino or Tandang Sora played a big role in the revolution by using her store as a refuge for the sick and wounded. So we have the saying of MJ Arnado. So feminist vision of society and their perceived sources of women's oppression vary depending on how they have experienced differentiation, oppression, or exploitation. So sa ngayon, di ba, there's still gender inequality between sa mga lalaki and mga babae talaga. So, but as time passes by, unti-unti na rin nagkakaroon ng privilege and rights ang mga Filipino women in terms sa mga job occupations, pati na rin sa freedom to violence, and pati na rin sa mga sexual abuse or sexual harassment because of meron na rin pinapatupad ng mga laws regarding with it. And lastly, to enjoy life without discrimination.
So we come now to the third topic of Filipino political psychology, or the fields of psychology, which is the Filipino psychotherapy. Psychotherapy has been defined as a situation comprising of elements such as healing agent, a person who is seeking for relief, and a healing relationship that includes a structured series of contacts between healer and relief seeker. Provided with this definition, the most fundamental aspect of therapy will be dependent upon the quality of the relationship and the way it is used. So, to add on the fundamental aspects of the healing process, the techniques, methods, and theoretical assumptions of the therapist are included as contributing factors. So, ang psychotherapy and ang psychology, wala namang masyadong difference between the two. Kasi parehas din naman silang talking therapy sa psychology, counseling, and sa psychotherapy more on therapy din kasi para sila nag-a-assess ng isang individual na may problem sa mental health, and those who are seeking for advice or those who are wanted to be aware on the situations that they find difficult. One of the most famous Filipino psychotherapy is Maria Lourdes Icarunda, aka Honey. She devoted 5 decades of her life to ensuring the well-being of Filipino children and families. She obtained her Master of Arts in Psychology from Ateneo de Manila University in 1969 and went on to take her PhD in Clinical Psychology during 1977, with specialized training in child and family therapy from University of California. She is a successful clinical therapist and works in an area that is very relevant, which is children and family. She blends micro and macro by choosing to help children and families who are disadvantaged overseas migrant workers, street children, and disaster survivors. So Maria Lourdes Icarunda focuses on the mental being ng mga children and families. She devoted, dito nga nakalagay is she devoted 5 decades. So ilang taon ba yun yung 5 decades na yun? So he devoted 5 decades of her life para ma-ensure lang yung well-being ng isang Filipino children and families. So talagang napaka-devoted niya sa Filipino people. And she is also a very successful therapist kasi 'di ba she is one of the famous psychotherapists in the Philippines.
So we have now the Filipino social psychology. Filipino social psychology is the study of how Filipinos think and feel about their social world and how they interact and influence one another. The socialness of social psychology varies as social psychologists sometimes examine how non-social factors affect social thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and sometimes study how social factors influence non-social thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So it have the concepts din kasi for understanding a people's way of life, yung social psychology nga, yung mind, yung personality natin or yung behavior natin. Kasi it is most difficult one. Especially tayong mga Filipino, we have different way to show our attitude and values based sa personality natin. And iba-iba kasi yung kadalasan na pinapakita nating behavior or actions in front of others kapag we're socializing with them. So we have now the pahiwatig. Pahiwatig is a pioneering study in intercultural and linguistic theory that is helpful to communication and language scholars, students in culture and society, particularly psikolohiyang Pilipino. So Filipinos are fond of nonverbal communications. And nagfo-focus din siya sa indirect communication through ambiguity and insinuation or sinasabi nga natin pahiwatig. Kasi nga 'di ba tayong mga Filipino magaling tayong magpahiwatig sa mga bagay-bagay like mahilig tayo sa hand gestures, yung pursing the lips, and yung pag-raise natin ng eyebrows natin, and syempre yung nangungusap na mga mata that you can really tell na may ibig sabihin or meaning with that specific gesture. So we have now mga uri ng pahiwatig. So number 1, we have the pagsasawalang kibo. So for example, nagtampo siya sa iyo or something, so wala siyang kibo. And number 2, we have the pagmumukmok at pagmamaktol. So mostly, yung mga anak ang mga behavior or may mga actions na ganito, especially pag may hinihingi sila sa kanilang parents na hindi binibigay. So number 3, we have the pagdadabog. Kasi mostly, mga anak din yung mga may behavior na ganito. Especially kapag napapagalitan sila ng mga magulang nila, may padabog na nangyayari. So number 4, we have parinig. So ito yung kapag may mga kaaway ka somewhat, nangyayari yung mga parinig moments. And ika-5th, we have paglalambing sa mga loved ones mo, sa mga families, friends mo, ganun. And ika-6, we have the paglalangis or pagnunuyo sa isang tao. And we have pag-awit or more likely mga kantahan sessions, mga pahiwatig based on sa mga gusto mong songs if you're sad or happy or even in love. And lastly, we have pasaring biro or kantiyaw, mga biroan moments and joking or teasing moments with your friends.
The beginnings of Psikolohiyang Pilipino. What is Psikolohiyang Pilipino? Psikolohiyang Pilipino is anchored on Filipino thought and experience as understood from a Filipino perspective. Psikolohiyang Pilipino is defined as the study of diwa or psyche, which in Filipino directly refers to the wealth of ideas referred by the philosophical concept of essence, and an entire range of psychological concept from awareness to motives to behavior. Psikolohiyang Pilipino is based on assessing historical and sociocultural realities, understanding the local language, unraveling Filipino characteristics, and explaining them through the eyes of the native Filipino. Ang Psikolohiyang Pilipino po, parang nabuo siya para naman, kasi 'di ba, yung psychology is more on yung theories and methodology is all about Western ganun. Tapos yung Psikolohiyang Pilipino is made to understood the Filipino perspective. Psikolohiyang Pilipino concentrated on a type of indigenization which is based largely on the simple translation of concepts, method, theories, and measures into Filipino. The principal emphasis of Psikolohiyang Pilipino is to foster the national identity and consciousness, social involvement, and psychology of language and culture. It is thus concerned with proper applications to health, agriculture, art, mass media, religion, and other spheres of people's daily life. Psikolohiyang Pilipino is to contribute to universal psychology, which can be realized only if each group of people is adequately understood by themselves and from their own perspective. Psikolohiyang Pilipino is a step towards contributing to universal psychology. Yun nga, ginawa yung Psikolohiyang Pilipino para naman magkaroon din ng parang own perspective sa ating mga Pilipino. The beginnings of Psikolohiyang Pilipino or Filipino psychology. It was in the early 1970s that this was initiated when Virgilio Gaspar Enriquez returned to the Philippines from Northwestern University, USA, with a PhD in social psychology and lost no time in introducing the concept of Psikolohiyang Pilipino. Later, madidiscuss natin yan si Virgilio Enriquez, and together with then Chairman of the Department of Psychology at the University of the Philippines, UP, Dr. Alfredo V. Lagmay, Enriquez embarked on a research into the historical and cultural roots of the Philippine psychology. Si Virgilio Enriquez po and with Dr. Alfredo V. Lagmay, parang sa kanila nag-start yung Psikolohiyang Pilipino. The research included identifying indigenous concepts and approaches in Philippine psychology and developing creativity and inventiveness among Filipinos. From these researchers, a 2-volume bibliography on Filipino psychology and a locally developed personality test, Panukat ng Ugali at Pagkatao or Measure of Character and Personality, were produced in 1975. Enriquez chaired the unang pambansang komperensya sa Psikolohiyang Pilipino, or the first National Conference on Filipino Psychology, held at the Abelardo Auditorium at UP. In this conference, the ideas, concepts, and formulation of the Psikolohiyang Pilipino were formally articulated. And siya po si Virgilio Gaspar Enriquez, or the pioneer of the Psikolohiyang Pilipino. Virgilio is born in the province of Bulacan, Philippines. He was trained by his father to speak the native tongue fluently since he was a child. So simula talaga pagkabata, sinanay na siya nung tatay niyang magsalita ng Filipino. Yeah, iba pala yung Tagalog sa Filipino. His father would always find time to have a discussion with him in Filipino. For example, he would ask the young Virgilio to read the days in English language paper but read it out loud in Filipino as if it was originally written in that language. Imaginein mo na pagbabasahin ka ng newspaper na nakasulat in English language pero bibigkasin mo siya in Filipino language. Ganun siya kahusay mag-Filipino. After that, Enriquez was formally initiated into psychology in 1963 when he started teaching at the University of the Philippines. As early as 1965, he was using the Filipino language in teaching. For example, in a psychology class exam, he did not translate a certain dream to English because this was an actual dream told to him by a resident of Bulacan. Kahit nung nagtuturo na siya, parang nag-focus talaga siya or talagang ginamit niya yung Filipino language. In 1966 naman, he left, he left for the United States to pursue a master's, then later a doctoral degree in psychology at Northwestern University at Evanston, Illinois. While in this foreign land, amidst foreign tourists, he watched the disenchantment of young student activists in the Philippines. I think nung time na to, merong gulo dito sa Pilipinas and nabalitaan yun ni Enriquez, ni Virgilio rather. After that, parang kahit doon na siya nag-aaral sa ibang bansa, talagang never niyang kinalimutan yung Filipino language. Kahit nag-aaral siya ng mga Western theories and methodology, still hindi nawawala sa kanya yung pagiging Pilipino. Enriquez returned to the Philippines in 1971, bringing with him a wealth of Western knowledge which he did not impose on his Filipino colleagues and students. Diba? Kahit sobrang tagal niyo doon sa ibang bansa, pagdating niya dito sa Filipino, parang hindi pa rin yun yung ginamit niya to teach other people. Still, Filipino language pa rin or yung methodology dito ng Pilipinas yung ginagamit niya. He established the Philippine Psychology Research House or the PPRH, which later became the Philippine Psychology Research and Training House, or also the PPRTH. This place became home to materials on Psikolohiyang Pilipino. Growing to its present size of more than 10,000 references, it also became home to research with a Filipino perspective, as well as an abode to individuals inspired by Enriquez's enthusiasm, who eventually made their own contribution to the growth of Psikolohiyang Pilipino. So si Virgilio Gaspar Enriquez talaga yung nag-start ng mga research na nakasulat sa Filipino language. Enriquez became chairman of the Department of Psychology in 1977 to 1982. He motivated students to write their papers in Filipino to discover important ethnic concepts, thus contributing to the growth of the national language. He was advisor and reader of theses and dissertations written in Filipino and psychology, linguistic, anthropology, philosophy, and Philippine studies. His influence went beyond the UP. He taught at other institutions such as De La Salle University, Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Maynila, University of Santo Tomas, and Centro Escolar University. He was also visiting professor at the University of Hawaii, Tokyo University for Foreign Students, University of Malaya, and University of Hong Kong. Enriquez authored several publications in indigenous psychology, Filipino personality, psychology of language and politics, philosophy and values, cross-cultural psychology, and Filipinolohiya or Philippine studies. This list includes indigenous psychology and national consciousness, from colonial to liberation psychology, and Enriquez authored several publications in indigenous psychology, Filipino personality, psychology of language and politics, philosophy and values, cross-cultural psychology, and Filipinolohiya or Philippine studies. The list includes indigenous psychology and national consciousness, from colonial to liberation psychology. A chapter contribution to Lourdes and Turtle's book, Psychology Moving East. And his last publication before he passed away in 1994, Pagbabangong Dangal, Indigenous Psychology and Cultural Empowerment. Enriquez received numerous awards during his lifetime: fellowships, scholarships, recognitions, and grants, both in the Philippines and internationally. He made significant contribution to the awareness of Psikolohiyang Pilipino and Asian psychology. One of his most significant awards, the Outstanding Youth Scientist of the Philippines, from the National Academy of Science and Technology in 1982, was in recognition of his work in Psikolohiyang Pilipino. After his death, he was given a posthumous award, the National Achievement in Social Sciences Award in 1997, by the National Research Council of the Philippines for outstanding contribution in the social science on a national level. So kung titingnan natin na sa field ng Psikolohiyang Pilipino, sobrang importante ni Virgilio Gaspar Enriquez dahil parang sa kanya talaga nagsimula yung Psikolohiyang Pilipino. New direction or volunteering. New direction or volunteering is another field in Psikolohiyang Pilipino or Filipino psychology. Volunteering is generally considered an altruistic activity where an individual or group freely gives time to benefit another person, group, or organization. Volunteering is also renowned for skill development and is often intended to promote goodness or to improve human quality of life. May also have positive benefits for the volunteer as well as for the person or community served. Volunteering has the ability to improve the quality of life and health, including longevity of those who donate their time, and research has found that older adults benefit the most from volunteering. It's known not only to be related to happiness, but also to increase happiness. Also, giving help was a more important benefit of better reported mental health than receiving help. Di ba nga pag sabi ng mga matatanda, mas okay na yung ikaw ang magbigay kesa ikaw yung pagbigyan. And kayo ba guys, na-try niyo na bang makapag-volunteer? Kasi ako hindi pa, pero gusto ko siyang matry. Ate Leia, na-try niyo na bang mag-volunteer? Kaya nga ganun. Or kasama kayo sa isang group na nagbo-volunteer? Ate Rochelle.
Hindi ko pa na-try as in
Hindi
na
pa.
parang. Pero gusto ko rin siyang i-try.
Yeah.
Kasi why not? Why not help other people?
Yun nga.
Diba?
Ako din, hindi ko pa na-try.
Hindi pa. Same. Pero, awan ko kung volunteer na ba kung kasama na sa volunteering yung pagdodonate. Yeah. Pero kung pagdodonate, nakapag-donate naman na ako. Studies have also shown that volunteering can cause a decrease in loneliness for those volunteering as well as those for whom people volunteer. Hindi lang siya nakakatulong sa ibang tao, pero nakakatulong din siya sa mental health yung mismong nagvo-volunteer. Kasi pag nagbibigay ka, di ba, ang saya, tapos nakikita mo yung pinagbibigyan mo is masaya din. So parang in return, kahit ang volunteering pati is hindi mo pag ginawa mo to, dapat wala kang hinihinging kapalit. Dapat kusang loob mo siyang binibigay. That is volunteering. And lastly, developmental psychology. Developmental psychology is a scientific approach which aims to explain growth, change, and consistency through the lifespan. Looks at how thinking, feeling, and behavior change throughout a person's life. A significant proportion of theories within this discipline focus upon development during childhood, as this is the period during an individual's lifespan with the most change occur. So, ang developmental psychology, ang focus niya naman is how people think, feel, and behave, na paano nagbabago-bago yung behavior ng isang tao, yung iniisip niya, yung nararamdaman niya, ganon. Tapos, ang developmental psychology is nagsistart siyang mag-focus sa childhood kasi during childhood period, doon kadalasan parang doon mostly nagsistart yung changes. Parang doon mo makikita kung may nagbabago ba talaga sa isang tao. And that is developmental psychology. For the references of our topic, thank you for listening. Hope you learned something,
Thank you
guys.
po for listening. Thank you.
Thank you po.
Sana po may nakuha po kayong knowledge about our topic.